You're live, Gary. Go, Gary. Gary, freeze. I think Gary's frozen.
Am I frozen?
No, you're unfrozen. Go ahead, Gary.
He's frozen again.
I swear he's messing with me. But then again, Gary can't freeze that hard.
Okay, can we fix all that in post-production?
I mean, we're live.
We're semi-professionals, Gary, and we're live.
Well, the problem is the world has gone to shit. I'm drinking this mushroom coffee, which really does not give me the jitters, which is good. I've got total TDS, which means this damn situation that we have put ourselves into, we've got to figure it out. Politics has taken over our lives. There are dogs sleeping with cats, sleeping with Haitians, sleeping with people coming over the borders to kill everybody, but no problem. We'll straighten it out. We'll figure it out. We are here to tell you what is what. Let's jump into the rotation and figure it out.
I love that new intro music and with the graphics.
Thank you.
I didn't hear the intro music.
New
technology. We got a new technology. You know, we haven't been out for the last couple of weeks because we've been trying to decompress after the election, which has not been easy. As you can tell, it's not going that well either. But we have got all sorts of unusual things we never expected to happen. But we have things to deal with on the federal level, the state level, the local level, and we will straighten it out. So let's start with the national level. First off, let's introduce ourselves. My name is Gary Stein. I'm the political director for Suncoast NORML here in sunny Florida. And our master of public health. And in the lower left-hand corner, our executive director, our master of business administration, Carlos Angel Jose Armida.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you. Very nice.
Directly above, coming to us from Maryland, where he is above the Beltway, but hanging below the Beltway, our executive director and master of public administration, Christopher Cano.
Appreciate you.
For some reason, I'm not getting the audio. Anyways, and from inside the Beltway, where everybody is getting hit in every which direction, our national director in NORML for politics, Morgan Fox. Morgan, how you doing today?
Hey, everybody.
How is everybody handling the upcoming change of the guard, so to speak?
A little bit of a mixed bag. I think that a lot of cannabis policy advocates are rightly concerned that a political party that has been increasingly supportive of cannabis policy reform, but has also been less supportive of it historically than Democrats, is now about to take power. And even though we are seeing a lot more lawmakers that are on our side among the GOP, this is still a relatively low priority issue for them. I think a lot of people are heartened by some of the statements that President-elect Trump made during the campaign, particularly towards the end of it, regarding supporting rescheduling, supporting safe banking, and having made previous statements about wanting to legalize cannabis, although he's never actually come out and said the D word, deschedule, yet. But I do think that a lot of folks are worried that it's going to be very difficult for us to be able to keep this issue front and center and be able to find time on various committee schedules and be able to pull together the political capital that we need in order to force floor votes, even on incremental legislation. That being said, there's still a lot of opportunities there. I think a lot of people are also pretty concerned about some of the appointees that we're likely to see, or at least some of the nominees. Obviously, confirmation process is going to be long and ongoing, but that's also a little bit of a mixed bag. We just recently saw Matt Gaetz, who would have been great for cannabis policy reform, and not making any judgments about his suitability for any other issue spaces, but just dropping out of the contention for the AG and seeing Pam Bondi be nominated, who has a less than stellar record when it comes to supporting cannabis policy reform, as I'm sure y'all Florida guys can tell me more about than I can tell you.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, we dealt with Pam Bondi for quite a bit during the Rick Scott administration, where she basically went, as opposed to being the attorney general, which is basically the lawyer for the state, she was Rick Scott's attorney, basically doing his bidding. Now we currently have Ashley Moody, who is doing the same thing for Rick DeSantis, but Pam had her own individual ideas on how to handle things. I once called her out on a number of things. I mentioned it to you that I wrote an article about her in part back in 2016 when Amendment 2 was trying to go out. And she was saying, well, we have to protect the Constitution. Then that's what I'm always going to do. I'm going to protect the Constitution. And I was basically saying, well, why didn't you protect this, let this amendment go through? Why were you fighting it? And she was totally confused as what her actual opinion was. And I was in a constitutional revision committee meeting. I had a bill which actually stated that once this goes through, that the word cannabis will be used in all laws and bills and statutes. So it's not to be confused with marijuana, which was basically a term that was used to make it illegal and had too much weight to it, so to speak. And I got a number of people who had already agreed to go ahead and push it through. And my appearance sheet was like the third one down. So I got there real early, stood up in the front. She saw my sheet, looked at me, put it in the back of the panel. And I sat there for 4 hours until there was only 2 panel letters left. And everybody had gone home. And she said, go ahead, Mr. Stein, you can talk now if you really want to say anything. So she knows me. She doesn't love me. And she is not going to be our friend. She never has been. But she does know the importance of the quid pro quo. I mean, basically, she took a $25,000 campaign donation in order to drop Trump's original lawsuit that was against him for his fake university. And we were one of the few states that didn't actually sue him. That suit never came back. She did give the $25,000 back, but that lawsuit never came back. And she's ready to do it again. So that is where we stand with Ms. Bondi. But we still, at least for the last 4 years, had finally some movement towards descheduling or rescheduling. But where is it right now? I know you're deep into that, and I'm concerned as to why National NORML, it was not going to be one of the ones who's going to be speaking in testimony in December. Please talk about that and what's going on right now.
Well, sure. Well, before we get into that, I do want to hit on some of the other appointees that we're potentially looking at, because I do think that they could potentially be important for cannabis policy reform going forward. The question is just exactly how much. One of the first people that really comes to mind is President-elect Trump's chief of staff, Susie Wiles. Apparently has a reputation as a very no-nonsense person, but that is, has more than a few compassionate bones in her body, which is good. The fact that she has worked for a company that represented a large MSO, I don't think is necessarily meaningful, because we've seen that sort of precedent before. There's a lot of strange bedfellows when it comes to PR firms and lobbying firms, especially when you start talking about much bigger money and larger operators. RFK Jr. in HHS, again, like strictly speaking about cannabis, he's said some pretty good things about it. So we might have, a pathway to really start working internally with that agency for a better regulatory system for cannabis and cannabinoid drugs moving forward. Dr. Mehmet Oz being put up for Medicare and Medicaid. Not sure how that position could really enact any serious change. We've always been hopeful that we might be able to get things like Medicare and Medicaid to be able to pay for medical cannabis, but that's always been a little bit of a long shot. That being said, I do think that we have a potential avenue there to institute something like that. Doug Collins being put up for head of the VA. He voted against allowing VA doctors to recommend medical cannabis to patients within the system. But he did vote to protect state medical programs when it came up in appropriations. So that's another mixed bag. Doug Burgum in Interior. He personally signed decriminalization and other cannabis bills as governor, pardoned people for cannabis as governor. He's not on board with full legalization yet, or home cultivation. But he does have the support of a lot of tribal leaders. It's not uniform by any means, but that is at least somewhat of a good sign about the potential interaction between the federal government and tribal authorities when it comes to their decisions whether or not to allow regulated cannabis markets within their sovereign territory. One appointee that I am a little bit concerned about is South Dakota Governor being put up for the head of the Department of Homeland Security. Given that Noam has not only been pretty staunchly anti-cannabis and personally worked to and use taxpayer money to eliminate the ability of the South Dakota voters to be able to legalize cannabis a few years back, also, I think has been making statements that make me think that it's going to be very difficult to find an ally in her when it comes to things like non-interference of state legal cannabis markets by agencies like Customs and Border Patrol, sort of like the stuff that we're seeing in New Mexico right now. I'm worried that if she does get this job, that we could see that sort of behavior begin to spread to other states that are within CBP's 100-mile jurisdiction of the border. But moving on to rescheduling.
Wait. I'm sorry, Morgan. Before you go on from there, I have a quick question for you. So from what I remember from Trump's first term, right? These people that he appoints don't tend to last for very long. So my wonder is do you have any idea how, like, is this administration going to be like a little bit more grounded? Is it more likely that these people are going to stay in the positions that they're putting forward, or is somebody going to say the wrong thing and then Donald Trump is going to be like, no, get the fuck out, you're fired?
Yeah, I think it's pretty difficult to determine at this point. I mean, a perfect example is during the first term when Jeff Sessions came in. He was like a golden child, and very, very shortly thereafter was set packing. So I think it's very difficult to predict.
Okay, I'm sorry. Go right ahead.
No, and before Morgan moves on, I do want to say that out of all these picks, the most concerning, I feel, is the Attorney General, is Pam Bondi, because the Attorney General heads up the Justice Department, and we got under Obama the Cole memo, and then we see Sessions Justice Department reverse that. How cannabis laws are essentially enforced, whether or not state programs get attacked. We've seen writers in Congress preventing the DOJ from using tax dollars to go after them, but the budget still has to be, hashed out. I know there's also the farm bill, which needs to be renewed because that has to be done every 5 years. And Pam Bondi, was originally behind the ban on smoking medical marijuana in Florida, and Ron DeSantis came in after the fact, and he, of course, signed an executive order allowing for smoking as a method of ingestion. And then, of course, some people try to say, oh, well, Pam Bondi was just following Rick Scott's lead. And that's a concern, too, because, you want an independent judiciary. You want an attorney general that's going to, be for justice, not be the president's watchdog or the governor's watchdog when it comes to, legal counsel. And then when Pam Bondi served on the president's commission on combating drug addiction and opioids, that commission, and she signed off on that report, essentially said that marijuana is a gateway drug, and that the National Institute of Drug Abuse found marijuana to be 2.5 times greater a chance that a marijuana user would become an opioid abuser. And that's, those are disturbing things to think that anybody would be willing to sign off on if we're going to have a forward-thinking, reform-minded, government. And so I just want to make, caution folks, that when those hearings come up, to confirm, Senate candidates in Florida. Yeah, probably Marco Rubio, Rick Scott. They're going to fall lockstep in line. But, for folks out there listening in other states, contact your senators. Let them know that you don't necessarily support some of these picks, especially, some of the ones that Morgan went over that, a bit more concerning. And you're right. It seems to be a mixed bag in the sense that the GOP is slowly dragging its feet. There are promising members of the GOP. Brian Mast from Florida co-chairs the Congressional Cannabis Caucus. But then you got the Texas Attorney General suing to overturn the voter-approved marijuana decriminalization laws that the voters just passed at the November ballot box. So it is definitely a mixed bag across the country, because at the same time that you see Republicans in Indiana leading the efforts to legalize marijuana in that state. So, I say all that to say, if you're a Republican, hold your folks accountable. That's why there's primary elections. And you probably even have more sway on some of your Republican senators than some of the folks on the left side of the aisle. But make those phone calls when they come out. Sign those action alerts by NORML when they come out, like the one that came out this week around the Safer Banking Act. Right, Morgan?
Yeah, well, not only that, but I think that, when it comes to the Department of Justice, we do have a few things on our side. The first being that, even if Pam Bondi is confirmed and is antagonistic towards cannabis policy reform or towards legal cannabis markets at the state level, they're still prevented from being able to interfere with medical cannabis programs because of a recurring appropriations rider that has been in place since 2014 and is so non-controversial in Congress now that it's part of the base language and has been for the last couple of years. One concern that I do have there is that there was an attempt to restrict that to make it so that that restriction on investigations and prosecutions did not apply to any business or entity that existed within 1,000 feet of a school or other sensitive use area. But when you look at the basically the maps of where medical cannabis dispensaries are, especially in more densely populated areas, pretty much all of them fall within 1,000 feet of a school or a special use area, because the DOJ had been not on the not prioritizing enforcement against them, and so states moved forward without those restrictions really in mind. But a really good way to combat that is really just to talk to lawmakers that represent those districts and say, look, if this passes, every single dispensary and all medical access in your district is basically going to vanish. Now, when you couple that with the fact that a lot of localities in the suburbs, exurbs, rural areas have instituted bans on cannabis businesses, this 1,000-foot rule could very easily completely disrupt medical cannabis access in almost every single state in which it exists. Luckily, it doesn't look like that rider is really planning on going anywhere, but that is something that we need to watch out for. But at the same time, we also have to really think about the fact that for many, many years, federal prosecutors, despite things like the rescission of the Cole memo by Jeff Sessions and somewhat less friendly attorney generals in like Bob Barr, that federal prosecutors by and large have not been cracking down on legitimate medical or adult use cannabis operations. Luckily, they have a significant amount of autonomy, and I think that they've learned from the lessons of the last decade that interfering with regulated cannabis markets is a terrible waste of resources. So, even if Pam Bondi is confirmed and is antagonistic on this issue, I think that we do still have a little bit of a safety buffer there. That being said, if she is antagonistic towards this issue, then it might be potentially more difficult for us to be able to get further gains when it comes to agency restrictions and guidelines.
Now, the DEA is supposedly working on rescheduling as part of an initiative that started over a year and a half ago or so now, that was initiated finally by the Biden administration. Now, if we go back in history, though, and look at the original Controlled Substance Act of 1970, it does say that the Attorney General can reschedule or deschedule any item within that schedule. And yet we have not had one single Attorney General who's had the wherewithal or balls or whatever to actually make this happen. And I was absolutely certain that it was never going to happen under Sessions. Barr was too interested in doing the will of the president at that point in time. And now we have Bondi, who again is more interested in doing whatever the president will want her to do. I'm wondering, is it possible they can even stop the current progress going on that the DEA has been working on, or is that all going to go away now that it's a new administration?
I don't think that process is going to be stopped. We've already heard statements from President-elect Trump that he wants to move forward with this. I think it would be politically problematic for anybody that has a say in the process to try to unilaterally stop it or derail it. And also, the DEA's administrative law judge seems to be flexing quite a bit of muscle when it comes to some of the more problematic or questionable behaviors that the DEA has engaged in regarding the scheduling petition, including how the witnesses for the upcoming hearings were assigned and approved, the potential for internal communications between prohibitionist groups that could potentially violate federal law. This judge seems pretty annoyed at the behavior of the DEA so far. So I think that we, at the very least, procedurally have an ally there to get a fair shake. And I'm not hearing really any sort of rumblings that the incoming administration has any interest at all in obstructing or delaying the hearings coming up. That being said, they still could take a really, really long time because of various procedural motions, because of lawsuits challenging various issues involved with it, and simply just the slow grinding wheels of justice.
Morgan, one thing that concerned me was smart approaches to marijuana, which is technically an anti-legalization group, nonprofit out there run by Kevin Sabet, who's a former, drug czar, and looking at the fact that it seems as though they've been even trying to taint the process. I know that's been kind of breaking news recently, and just trying to hear it. It feels like the prohibitionist groups actually have an inside track at the DEA that they can almost put their thumb against the scales. What are your thoughts on actually getting a fair shake when it comes to this, especially considering, like I said earlier, about how the Presidential Opioid Commission with Pam Bondi on it, we're saying things like marijuana is a gateway drug to heroin abuse.
Yeah, well, I think the fact that the administrative law judge is actively questioning the process that has seemed pretty stacked in favor of prohibitionists is a good sign. The fact that they're questioning, potentially problematic communications behind the scenes between DEA and prohibitionist groups. We all know that they have not only just ridiculous amounts of funding, but also have been kind of obfuscating a lot of where that funding is coming from. We know that they also have the benefit of pushing the status quo and having a lot more connections in government than a lot of advocates do. But I think that during this recent period, I think they got a little brazen and exposed themselves in a way that could potentially backfire on them. But it's clear at this point that Project Sam and a lot of other prohibitionist groups are basically partner organizations with the DEA, and I think the proof is in the pudding there when you look at the DEA's drug education website and you see relatively biased analyses of studies or straight up opinion pieces simply being republished from Sam's website on
there. Oh, Gary's on mute.
Hearings that are supposed to occur in December.
Go for it again, Gary.
Okay, so where is the current process right now as far as the DEA is concerned? There's supposed to be hearings where they were originally postponed. Are they in December? Are they in January? And who's going to be involved?
The preliminary hearings are still going to take place in early December, but the substantive hearings are much more likely to take place in January or February. There are currently active lawsuits regarding involvement and participation in the hearings. So I think the total list is still kind of up in the air right now. Clearly, we at NORML were pretty disappointed that we were not approved for participation, but we also did not get an explicit denial letter either. So maybe there's still a shot that we will be able to get in there. That was particularly disappointing because, pretty confident that we have a good legal argument for standing, given the fact that we represent cannabis consumers who are directly affected by the schedule of cannabis under the CSA, but also that NORML has taken part in almost every hearing of this nature in the past.
And we've had quite a few bills that actually came through this last Congress, and relatively few made it out of committee. I think what was only one or two actually, and they're all going to go away at the end of this session. Is there any bills of that kind that are going to be taken up in the lame duck session?
Well, I think that for appropriations, we're very, very likely looking at continuing resolutions. So it's going to be difficult to get amendments passed in there, especially since there's very little incentive for the GOP to play ball, especially on the budget with Democrats when they're going to get handed the keys to the kingdom very soon. But in terms of standalone bills, we're trying to find a pathway to move safer banking through the Senate. A lot of this is also going to depend on whether or not Mike Johnson is willing to move legislation through the House. So we might just be looking at simple Senate movement, which, admittedly doesn't get us all the way there, but at least it's a step in the right direction. Another set of bills that I am trying to socialize getting moved in the lame duck right now are the Cure Act in the House and the Doobie Act in the Senate. Both of these bills would protect federal employees and federal employment applicants, as well as people applying for security clearances from discrimination for past cannabis use. Both of these bills passed through committee with on the House side with a very strong bipartisan vote, and on the Senate side for the Doobie Act with a slightly less strong bipartisan vote, but still pretty solid. And no other piece of cannabis policy reform legislation has gotten through committee in both chambers this session. SAFER was approved by the Senate Banking Committee, but has not moved in the House through committee. So I think that the fact that these bills, which are very, very similar and have both passed through committee, may actually have a shot in the lame duck session if we can generate enough interest in moving them. And I think one of the factors that we might be able to use in our favor is the people that are, in fact, one particular person who is going to be ostensibly in charge of government efficiency. Elon Musk had to, as a federal contractor, take urine tests for cannabis for about a year because he smoked a joint on Joe Rogan's podcast. And so, the Cure Act and the Doobie Act would, not necessarily protect current cannabis use, but I think are kind of in line with some of the feelings that I'm sure that Musk probably has about this issue. And also, if you're talking about massively slashing the size of the federal government, you really can't afford to be shrinking your talent pool.
Yeah, but we are going to be shrinking our talent pool. Were there any proponents of cannabis bills that are not going to be in the next Congress?
Oh, a number of them. And in particular, big shout out to Barbara Lee and Earl Blumenauer, two outgoing co-chairs of the Cannabis Caucus who are not going to be in Congress next year. Their losses will be keenly felt.
I also wanted to add, you were mentioning about the Doobie Act. Florida Senator Rick Scott, again, on the wrong side of history when it came to that committee vote. Unfortunately, he's just been reelected for 6 more years. I know Marco Rubio has been named as a possible Secretary of State in the Trump administration. Should he get that appointment, obviously Governor DeSantis will have the opportunity to appoint, essentially someone to fill that slot as our U.S. Senator from Florida until the 2026 election, when that seat actually comes up for election. So, in Florida right now, we have 2 prohibitionist senators. One of them we're stuck with for the next 6 years. One of them could move up to Secretary of State, which could open up that seat. So, for those of you out there, who care about reform, make sure that you write, Governor DeSantis and should, Senator Rubio be confirmed as Secretary of State, you ask him to appoint, a pro-reform person to that seat. It's important that, the grassroots, advocacy and efforts start now. The election's over. And that's, I think, the key thing is that we wanted to bring you on here today, Morgan, to really help folks put in perspective, well, what happens next? There were a lot of folks that were really excited for President Trump to get reelected. Me, not so much. I have no problem by admitting that. But I look at where we're at when it comes to policy and in movement. A lot of folks like to say that President Trump did something great with the farm bill and such, but that is a bill that has to be signed. It deals with everything from food stamps to our farmers getting the subsidies and such. It has to be done every 5 years or continue through a continuing resolution. So I don't necessarily give politicians credit for doing the bare minimums, a job that they have to do, like passing the budget and such. I want to see progress when it comes to this. And, even with the Biden administration, President Biden did pardon, several thousand people, but there are still people in cages. Right now he could use his executive powers on the way out instead of pardoning turkeys to pardon every person in jail for cannabis, that's in a federal prison right now, at least. And definitely encourage governors of other states to do the same, before the next administration comes to power.
Absolutely. And I would encourage everybody listening to go to norml.org/act and contact the White House in support of expanding the pool of people that are eligible for the mass pardons that he issued over the last 2 years, as well as to actively pursue taking movement on the dozens of open clemency applications for people that are currently incarcerated for nonviolent federal cannabis violations. I think in terms of the White House, that's really our most important ask at this point, and the thing that we're most likely to see action on. It's in line with the previous actions that the administration has taken and its previous rhetoric, and much more likely to be taken up than some of the other potential asks that we could make of the current administration. That being said, we also need to start working on Trump's transition team immediately to push for the issues and policies that we want to see happen, specifically actively supporting descheduling. And if that's not possible, at the very least, allowing the rescheduling process to continue moving forward, directing the Department of Justice and other federal agencies to deprioritize cannabis enforcement, protecting Second Amendment rights for cannabis consumers, working to protect employment rights for cannabis consumers, both past and present, when it comes to federal jobs or security and clearances, protecting housing or protecting cannabis consumers, especially patients, from housing discrimination when it comes to federally funded housing. I think that there's a lot of asks that we can make of the incoming administration now, and then we should be making them as early as possible so that we get the bug in his ear. So in addition to that and the other things that I mentioned in terms of like hoping that we could possibly get a floor vote on some of these bills in the Senate, even if we are in a position where we're not going to be able to pass standalone legislation in the lame duck, we do need to get as many co-sponsors on the existing bills as we possibly can so that we can hit the ground running in the 119th Congress, get these bills reintroduced as early as possible with the biggest cohort of original co-sponsors as we possibly can, and start moving them through committee as quickly as possible so that we might eventually be able to put enough pressure on both House and Senate leadership to actually get floor votes.
And I'm hopeful for the rescheduling hearings. I mean, it's no shocker to me that NORML didn't get picked this go around, because the last time NORML petitioned the DEA was in 1972, and by 1988 they finally had the hearing, and the DEA judge ruled in our favor. He said that cannabis has medical value, that it shouldn't be a Schedule I drug, and the DEA and essentially the Reagan and Bush administrations totally ignored that. And so, here we are today in 2024, despite the fact that in 88 we had a DEA judge say, cannabis should not be Schedule I. And then, as you pointed out earlier, there's some foolery going around with folks, trying to put their thumb on the scale, and prohibition is trying to continue the status quo. So appreciate all the hard work that you're doing, Morgan. I don't think folks at the grassroots level really understand, the structure of NORML with its chapters and then the national level, and that you in the national office really are our go-to guy on Capitol Hill. And you've been doing this, before you came to NORML, working, with the industry and such. And so I kind of segues into my question for you is, where do we as consumer advocates find, a cross purpose, a shared goal with the industry? because sometimes what we've seen as legalization has developed in other states, advocacy gives way to industry voices, because the industry is generating millions, if not billions of dollars, and they're able to write checks to the politicians that are much larger than a nonprofit, C3 or C4, like many of our NORML chapters across the country. So where do we go as a consumer movement in working with the industry to advocate for their customers who are the consumers?
Yeah, I mean, I really don't think that the burden should be on the consumers in these cases. I honestly think that the burden should be on the industry to look out for their customers and recognize that without their customers, without looking out for their best interests, there is no industry.
I think we have seen time and time again that many of these MSOs are far more interested in their profit motive than the patient motive. And that happens over and over and over again. That and the fact that those people who have medical states like Florida don't operate like medical states. They act like quasi-recreational states, as you were. You don't see anything that actually points it towards actually being a medical product at that point in time. And that's a shame, because at the very beginning, they said this has medical value, therefore it should not be illegal. That was even in the Schaefer report in 1971. And yet we're still fighting it to this day. And God bless him for Mr. Gates, for what he was able to do. At least he got in some bills to actually bring back some more research, which pretty much had already been done anyway, to try to move the needle. And my guess is that a lot of his legislation is probably left with him. I don't see anybody else supporting it besides him.
Well, I mean, one thing that I think that consumers can do to help bridge the gap between industry activism that is focused purely on industry needs and general activism that focuses on everybody's needs within the entire ecosystem of this is to vote with your dollars. If you're a consumer, support businesses that support advocates, support businesses that support consumers. And when you send that message in a large enough format and with a large enough group of consumers, I think that we're going to start seeing change. One piece of advice I would have for industry operators is to stop hiring mercenary law firm or lobbying firms, because they do not have your best interests in mind, and they are going to string you along just enough to keep that contract going.
Yeah, I've seen that happening too.
There is one thing I wanted to bring up too, is because in this country, because of the 2018 Farm Bill, we essentially have two industries in the cannabis sector now. You have the medical and adult use marijuana industry, and then you have the hemp industry. And we've seen both the medical and adult use multi-state operators advocating at the state levels and even in Congress to basically corral the powers and the products that are available in the hemp industry. And so I bring that up because I know right now in Ohio, that's a major issue, just like it was in Florida, just like it's been in Missouri. They recently, have been out there just going at each other hard. I mean, in Ohio, they're saying, the problem with the Farm Bill is that it never intended to set up a system for consumer products, and, intoxicating hemp products are, they're trying to ban them in Ohio. I know, Carlos, you've experienced a crackdown on labeling, being in the Florida hemp industry. So, Morgan, obviously NORML, we've continuously said, look, we're about consumer safety. Products need to be properly labeled. People need to do business properly, but there is space for both an adult use industry and hemp products. Carlos, I kind of just wanted to go to you. What are your thoughts moving forward, in all of this? I mean, you got a legislative session coming up in Florida. You're not quite sure what things are. Amendment 3 failed. So obviously, hemp businesses in Florida got a reprieve, at least, in not having to compete with an adult use industry for the near future. So what are your thoughts on all this, brother?
Well, first off, I want to make sure that whatever happens this legislative session, I think it's very important that if we see a hemp bill come forward of any kind, that we just stop playing ball with Ron DeSantis. I mean, I suspect that we are still going to have the same struggles that we've had the past couple of years now that, DeSantis got what he wanted out of us, and now that Amendment 3 has failed. So I can see him, or whatever Republican leadership, putting forward whatever hemp bill that's going to try to take us out of the industry. But I mean, what I would like to see moving forward is, there doesn't need to really be a difference. There doesn't really need to be like a segment of hemp and adult use, and it doesn't need to be in the way that like hemp advocates are saying, where like hemp is cannabis, we've already legalized. We don't need to do any more work. Like, I think we can see people who understand cannabinoids, these people that own hemp businesses, could be ushered into the cannabis market, the adult use cannabis market, and we can see nothing but good things happen from that. First off, we're not going to lose our businesses, and second, we are able to have more of a patient focus approach to the plant than anybody else, because we've been using it to treat patients for some time now. So I would like to see any legislation that moves forward with legalization to grandfather hemp industry people into the legalization.
It seems to me that more and more these days, the idea of a unified regulatory track is gaining steam. It is the same plant. The real issue becomes when you start dealing with synthetic or semi-synthetic cannabinoids. As you mentioned, there was no legislative intent to make those legal in the Farm Bill, and there are a lot of attempts to potentially ban those. The problem with those bans is that we know that prohibition doesn't work. We also know that it's basically whack-a-mole, because as soon as you ban one, the recipe gets tweaked, the molecule gets slightly changed, and now people are consuming something that has even less scientific study on what it does to the human body. So I think that we are going to have to work really hard to develop a regulatory system that allows novel cannabinoids into the regulated market in a careful, consumer safety centric manner. But the idea of keeping these bifurcated systems, I think, is showing itself to be increasingly non-viable.
I think that would come with legalization, though. I don't think my customers that use Delta 8 particularly want Delta 8.
Yeah, prohibition is.
I think if we legalize the plant, then all of a sudden Delta 8 is no longer a thing.
Yeah, I mean, and you can look at the market demand for novel and synthetic cannabinoid products across the country, and it's always highest in places that are still prohibiting cannabis.
Let's not forget also that same space was occupied by Spice and K2 at one point in time, because in that vacuum, anything could come in. But I mean,
Gary, you used to be able to get salvia at gas stations in Florida. Carlos, you remember those days in college where you could just buy salvia at the local head shop?
You guys remember the YouTube videos where it's like gardening on salvia and you just like flip out for a second?
Wild times, man. Wild times. Morgan, we appreciate you joining us today, catching folks up and the listeners on what's going on. I hope folks are enjoying. We're on a new software, so, we had some technical issues last go around, but, we've switched over from Restream to StreamYard, and it looks like everything's going good without a hitch. So I'm happy with that. Morgan, why don't you just tell folks what they can do to really influence what's next, how they can participate with National NORML and support the work that you're doing on Capitol Hill.
Well, as always, go to norml.org/act and contact your lawmakers. Also, definitely be prepared to see an onslaught of state-level cannabis-related bills coming up as the new legislative sessions start to ramp up at the state level. We're going to be keeping those up to date as we possibly can as we get into the next year. In the meantime, please reach out to the Biden administration, encouraging them to take action on clemencies and clemency applications and expanding the pardons. Talk to your senators and ask them to hold floor votes on SAFER and on the Doobie Act. And then, this is, going to be, I think, a very difficult time moving forward, but at the same time, we do have a lot of opportunities. I think looking at Congress now, more than 10% of both chambers are going to be new to Congress. So that provides us with a lot of opportunities for education on the issue, especially right now. And I think that it's incumbent upon us to make sure that none of those folks take office without knowing who we are and what we're about, and so we can be better positioned to hit the ground running when it comes to the 119th Congress, not only for pushing incremental legislation and improving the existing legislation that we have, but really trying to change hearts and minds when it comes to this issue.
Well, one more quick question before you go. McConnell was very central in regards to the last farm bill. He's not there anymore. Now we have Thune, that silent guy, that silent partner who was always behind him, who had some thoughts of his own, and now we're going to hear them. What are those things going to be heard? What are we going to hear from Thune?
Well, Thune has not been very supportive of cannabis policy reform. If you look at vote.normal.org, you see he's got a pretty solid F. That being said, he's also a relatively level-headed lawmaker from what I've been able to tell, and is also fairly independent and not necessarily going to just be going along with whatever the administration wants to do. That could be good or bad. But again, I think that there is an opportunity for us to work on him and change his mind. And if he sees that there are, rational pieces of legislation moving forward, that we very well might be able to get some space.
So, folks, if you're listening at home, go to normal.org, hit that donate button on the website. If you could just chip in $4.20 today to make all the difference. If you got more, please give more. But we want to continue to push all the amazing efforts that Morgan is doing on behalf of all of our NORML members across the country on Capitol Hill in Washington, D.C. And we can't do that without your time, your talent, and your treasure. So please go ahead and hit that donate button and help out today. And we really appreciate everything that you're doing, Morgan. We're definitely want you to come back in the rotation once the new year kicks off, and we can see where things are with the upcoming administration and the new Congress.
Anytime. Thanks for all your help, guys.
Yeah. Well, Carlos, with that, I think it's time for the news.
I don't have that video.
All right. Well, I'll just dive right into it. We have been talking a lot about consumer advocacy and where folks are, in being represented by NORML as a consumer advocacy organization. And one of the things that I really wanted to take a deep dive into is safety, consumer safety of the medical marijuana industry, in particularly in Florida. Because when they were first writing these rules, I know that I sounded the alarm, Gary sounded the alarm. We asked folks to pump the brakes and take a second look at pesticides and what they're going to be spraying on the cannabis plants. And, the Department of Health adopted, rules for pesticide use on medical marijuana. And those, rules were very clear in that, they had to be registered with the EPA. They had to, have an EPA approved label, that the active ingredient is either exempt from tolerance requirements or does not require an exemption for tolerance requirements. The pesticide does not prohibit use with enclosed structure. The pesticide label expressly has directions for use on unspecified crops. That the product label expressly has directions for use on crops or plants intended for human consumption, and that the active ingredients of the pesticide products are allowed for use on tobacco by the U.S. EPA. And then, these rules are meant to be reviewed. And of course, the DeSantis administration, has essentially, looked at these rules a few times. But most recently, one of the things that concerned me when I was looking on the social medias was an inspection that happened at the Fluent facility in Florida. And the Florida Department of Health noted that Pyganic was observed on site during the pesticide inventory. Pyganic gardening is a product that contains extracts of the daisy flower, pyrethrin. And that's an active ingredient that, works very well as a botanical insecticide. But really, it concerns me a little bit because pyrethrins kill insects directly on contact. But the chemicals, can hurt more than insects. These chemicals are harmful to humans, especially when you think that these products that they're being sprayed on are designed for, in some cases smoking, and in some cases used as a method of ingestion for sick people. People who have sensitive organs, and compared to a lot of pesticides, pyrethroids are not very toxic to humans. But there are some major concerns that folks have, that major conditions that folks can have, like skin irritation. Respiratory issues, because it can irritate the nose and throat, cause coughing, wheezing, difficulty breathing. High levels of pyrethroids can cause nervous system effects, such as headache, nausea, vomiting, fatigue, restlessness, mental status changes that can last for several days, and also bring on seizures, tremors, hyperthermia, and hyperglycemia. And this is the stuff that the Department of Health in Florida is allowing to be sprayed on products that you're buying at Fluent, on products that you're buying at other MMTCs in the state. And so that's a concern that I have. That's something that I wanted to bring up to you all. We're going to continue to monitor this situation, to do more, investigative journalism when it comes to it. But, all in all, this legislative session, I would encourage folks to definitely write their state representative, their state senators, to write the governor, and really ask for a reexamination of consumer safety and a consumer-oriented medical cannabis market in Florida. And when I say consumer-oriented, I mean these bills that Gary has been focused on as our political director in pushing. Number one being a home grow bill. Folks, as medical patients, we've seen it, with Joe Redner suing the state. We saw it with the folks when they adopted Amendment 2 in 2016, believed they would have whole access to the plant. And that has not been the case. In Florida, you've not been able to walk into a dispensary and buy a clone or get seeds or grow your own as a medical patient. And that's something that needs to change in the state of Florida. The second thing when it comes to consumerism is the ability to live our American values. We talk about life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And as a medical marijuana patient, oftentimes with a chronic debilitating illness, this is a lifesaver. But we forget about those other core values that we share in this country, and those are liberty and the pursuit of happiness. And you are not free to utilize medical cannabis and keep your job, to keep your firearms, to keep your kids, to keep your status, in needing an organ transplant. All these things are affecting patients right now in the state of Florida. And that's why we have legislative solutions to address that, whether it's workers' rights in the state of Florida, starting with public sector employees, whether it is, parental rights and not having your medical marijuana status used against you in court, whether it's your Second Amendment rights and not being stripped of your concealed carry permit or having to commit yourself to perjury in order to protect yourself, to protect your family, to even protect your medicine. Obviously, this is a very valuable crop that humans have been trading with for several thousand years. Thomas Jefferson even sold cannabis in order to buy guns for the Continental Army to give this nation its freedom. So when it comes to looking at a consumer-oriented system in Florida, we're going to need you, the voters, we're going to need you, the constituents of the state legislature and the governor, to get on the phone, to make phone calls, to click those action alerts, and to join us in our lobby days that we're going to have coming up. Gary, did you want to share anything else in regards to, the upcoming legislative session and how folks can participate with Suncoast NORML?
Wait, before you share, Gary, 1 second.
That's the NORML news. Let's flip this big screen to Gary.
Oh,
and Gary, come off mute for us, brother.
He's off.
There we go.
I was being muted elsewhere. I'm not saying exactly where, but we have already gotten in touch with several legislators who knew they were going to be in or who were just gotten in. We actually lost quite a few legislators this last session, so we had to do some rearranging. But we still have a cadre of bills that is solid, that is still continuing to evolve. I'm looking into right now that if we do get this cannabis descheduled, maybe we can get it into those rehab facilities as used for opiate rehabilitation. Because once that is listed as actively a medical product, we can get that federal ban lifted and put it in, whereas our state legislators already banned cannabis use in rehab facilities where people are trying to get off of opioids, even though we know it does work. So we'll be working on that.
Incredible.
We also have bills that is to be working to break down the verticals and allow micro licenses and allow vertical horizontal integration, so that more people can get into this industry besides the billionaires and the true leaves, who I think are on their own path somewhere. So we can't do this alone. We can do the footwork, we can do the onslaught, but in order to make, we need everybody. We need all you guys. I'm beside myself.
literally. But Gary, we appreciate all the hard work that you're doing, and if you're not already signed up on our email list, go to our website, sign up to become on our mailing list. Of course, we want to make sure that folks are getting the weekly emails. If you are on an email list, some of the things that Morgan talked about earlier, like those action alerts, are actually there. Scroll down all the way to the bottom. You can go ahead and click the action alerts and send those letters to your senators and members of Congress, and even to the White House. And then, of course, our weekly mailing list also includes, the ability to get your doctor recommendation in the state of Florida, and free webinars on how medical marijuana helps with the various debilitating illnesses that folks have. On the topic of debilitating illnesses, one of the ones that recently was struck down in 2 states via petition to be added on, both Arkansas and Maryland. So you got a red state and a blue state. Both rejected female orgasm disorder as a valid debilitating illness for medical marijuana. Some states, like Arkansas, said there needs to be more research. Maryland said it didn't meet the criteria, essentially, for a debilitating disorder. But I do find that interesting in the sense that there are conditions that medical cannabis does treat. And just because your state has a medical program, it's not the end all be all. Florida has essentially 9 or 10 conditions, and then kind of a catch-all phrase to allow doctors a loophole to just throw folks in there. But the fact is that 10 conditions is not comprehensive. In some states, they have as high as 33 conditions, and that's still not comprehensive. There's the issues like autism, spectrum disorder. There's a lot of other conditions. I find it ironic, Carlos. I see the giggles behind your face that female orgasm disorder doesn't qualify, but erectile dysfunction could probably get you a qualifying condition from the depression for not having a hard noodle. So.
But the good news is I do have a bill for that.
You guys want to hear a fun fact about cannabis and boners?
Cannabis boners. Tell us more, Carlos.
Cannabis, THC specifically impedes the blood flow. So, and boners are all about blood flow. So, actually, if you're using cannabis to treat erectile dysfunction, you're not going to have a good time.
And I would not recommend crushing ED tablets and taking a Red Bull. That is not a good idea.
Gary, is that why you had that last heart attack? Tell us the truth.
No, it was something totally different, but possibly even grosser, but who knows? I think it was a fried chicken.
Oh, man, that'll do it. That'll do it. Look, I want to say to folks, as much as folks might feel concerned, we've been here before, right? Elections happen. This isn't going to be our first rodeo with the Trump administration. This is not going to be our first rodeo with a Florida legislature that, isn't necessarily reform-minded. But the one clear thing is a majority of Floridians do want to see legal cannabis. Now, we can go back and forth all day, and we did it all election cycle, whether or not Amendment 3 was the right vehicle for that. There's even folks in the chat who, still feel as though Amendment 3 was not the right vehicle for that because it wasn't a comprehensive amendment. Just understand that you will never get a comprehensive omnibus amendment at the grassroots level in the state of Florida because of the restrictions on language for grassroots amendment in Florida. But the Florida legislature itself could easily put an amendment up for vote on the Constitution, which has as much bullshit as they want to throw in there. Just like they had a offshore oil ban and a vaping ban in the same constitutional amendment, because that's how it works in Florida. The people that you elect have much more power as your representative and your voice. And that's why it's important for you to engage in the political process beyond elections. So again, We're going to have some meetings coming up. We're going to have some planning sessions around what we're going to do this legislative session. There are going to be legislative delegation meetings that you can attend locally in your local county in Florida. I encourage you to go online right now and go to your county website and find when that county legislative delegation is happening. Sign up to be a witness. Tell them, sign up for the issues that are important to you, like home grow, like your Second Amendment rights, like your worker protections, like your ending medical discrimination against cannabis patients, ending discrimination in parental cases and court cases against patients. There are so many things that you, the voters, need to continue to speak up for, because if you don't, you're going to get roughshod over politicians that are going to take checks from other interests, whether those interests are from the hemp industry or those interests are from the MSOs and the medical marijuana and adult use industry, or whether they're from prohibitionists. And that's why I said it's NORML still has a place in being the voice for the cannabis consumer, for the little guy, for the average American, like we have been since our inception, since 1970. And I'm proud to serve on our national board alongside our founder, Keith Straub, who at 80 years old is still our chief general counsel, who is still doing everything possible to help make that happen. You heard from Morgan today, who's our political director that's on Capitol Hill. Shout out to our deputy director, Paul Armentano, who is really the brain trust in NORML, and who sends those amazing articles that we read on the news frequently each and every week. And so, again, we can't do this without you. We're asking folks, for their time, for their treasure, for their talent. So if you're watching, go to suncoastnormal.org. Go to become a member by going to membership. Your $25 a year gets you your membership card. We have the new 2025 membership cards in right now. You can pick up your membership card once you pay online at the St. Pete location for Chillum. Of course, again, you can also get your gold lapel pin, and we want you to continue to be a part of this. Go to National NORML website, drop them a couple bucks. Make sure we can continue to do all the great work that we're doing, both at the state and federal level. And of course, there's local governments coming up as well, that we want to continue to adopt decriminalization ordinances. We want to continue to address issues around not taking people to jail and continue to advocate for civil citations in the state of Florida and beyond. So thank you, everyone, for watching and for what you continue to do. And I want to say a big thank you to Gary, who does this without a paycheck. He's not here this time. Who does the work of the team of lobbyists that most companies would pay hundreds of thousands of dollars a year for. And so that's why it's important that if you could just drop a couple cents so we can continue to do this amazing work, and we can get Gary the gas money to go to Tallahassee.
Thank you for rubbing that in. I appreciate that.
So, and shout out to Carlos. Carlos has given Suncoast NORML a home at Chillum. Whether it's creating a studio in his Ybor shop or giving us a headquarters at the St. Pete shop to do events. And Carlos, thank you for just being a solid advocate through all of this. Most folks are either in this to make money, but for you, you're in this to make money, but you're also in this because you care. Because you're a cannabis consumer yourself. And I think that's the most important thing in all of it, is people to refocus and remember why they got into this industry in the first place. And I wish more MSOs and their CEOs who would remember that, is that there are sick people out there who are actually their consumers, their clients. And, folks don't deserve to make one rest set in this industry if they're not giving back and they're not supporting the people who really need access to this life-saving medicine. So, Carlos, thank you for all you do, brother.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
So, well, with that team, this is a great double feature that we have for you, this weekend. Obviously, you just heard from Morgan Fox, the National Director of Politics for NORML in Washington, D.C. We have an amazing show coming up next, which is going to be broadcast live on Sunday, the 24th at 11 a.m., featuring investigative Emmy-winning journalist Mike Deason. And we're going to talk more and go in-depth even farther on the future of legalization in Florida, talk more about recapping the election and what's next for legalization in our state and beyond in this country. And so I'm really excited to have Mike on and have this show as a double feature this weekend. So for those of you who are political junkies, go ahead and like this video, share on YouTube, subscribe. We want to continue to bring you great content each and every week, amazing guests each and every week. I'm really looking forward to 2025 and all the great guests that we're going to have lined up for you. So, of course, again, don't forget to like, share, subscribe. Tell folks to jump in the rotation each and every weekend. Peace.